Hey guys, Jenny Foreman here, and I was going to start out by addressing the quote by Edmonds and talk about what I thought the biggest obstacle that teachers face in trying to teach all students successfully. Me personally, as a secondary math teacher, I think the biggest obstacle is motivation. Students coming in as a high school student already have this preconceived notion of you either know how to do math or you don't know how to do math, and there's nothing really you can do about it. They've had all these experiences up until now, and maybe they haven't been successful at math, and so they're at the point where they're just like, why bother? Or they may have experiences, things that are going on at home, that mean that school in general is the least of their concerns. Of course, there's lots of factors that go into motivation. As a teacher, I always start out the beginning of the year trying to get to know my students and what their interests are. And I'll stand outside the door and I'll greet them as they walk in, so that I can see what their facial expressions are, see what kind of day they've had. And if I notice that, they're not looking so great, I may ask, how's it going? Is there something wrong? Offer them a hug if they'll let me give them one. But I also, try and make my lessons engaging and interactive to really try and pull them into the lesson. And for those that are struggling, really try and encourage them to come in and get the extra help that they need. It's sad to say, I can usually tell within the first couple of weeks who those students are that just don't care and probably aren't going to make it. But I will keep on and doing whatever I can to try and motivate them to get the help that they need. But sometimes it happens that at semester that you've been working with a kid for so long and or trying to get them to care, that at the end of the semester, they just haven't done anything and they have failed miserably and there's no way for them to recoup their losses. That, sad to say, I may give up on them at this, for the second semester, because most of the time I'll have 120 plus students. And so it's hard for me to spend that much time on those students that just don't care, when I have all these other students that need my help. I know I shouldn't say that. I think I've done a better job this year. A big reason is my classes are smaller. I don't have as many students. But also I've really tried to work with instilling in my students a growth mindset. Just the other day, in fact, I heard students saying, "Oh, I don't understand what we're doing." And then another student chimed in with, "You don't understand yet." And so I can tell that, they've really been listening to what I've been saying. Now, whether it's going in or not, that's another story. So anyway, motivation, I think, is the biggest thing for a secondary math teacher. As far as the second question, my memories of my K through 12 experience, which was forever ago, are not that great. And sad to say, I cannot remember a time where I went above and beyond the stated learning objective. I was very high achieving, but I think I really focused on, performance in my grades. And so I never really went above and beyond. I don't think I really did that until I got into graduate school, honestly, when my teachers, specifically my math teachers, are more constructivist. And I was going to point out what McTeague and Wiggins say about constructivism. They say on page 103, meaning cannot be taught, it must be fashioned by the learner via artful design and effective coaching by the teacher. Thus, part of what a curriculum designed to develop student understanding will do is teach students that their job is not merely to learn facts and skills, but also to question them for meaning. And so I think as a K through 12 learner, that's what I was focusing on, was just those facts and skills. In fact, I think that's probably what my teachers were focusing on, that I was kind of spoon-fed the answers. Whereas many of my courses as a graduate student, you'll be posed with a problem, and you may be working with a group, and you have to figure out, how to come about the answer. And so by doing it that way, you get a more deeper understanding, and you're able to remember it better. I just didn't have that in my K through 12 experience. I think I've really been able to use that a lot this year, more so with my students. We just recently, the past unit, we talked about in my pre-calc class, the unit circle. And before, I would just, we'd start out with triangles, and we do our 30, 60, 90 triangles, 45, 45, 90. And, I'd pretty much kind of give them what the answers were, give them, this is sine of pi over 3, sine of 45 degrees, whereas this time around, I had them in groups, gave them the unit circle, and they had to, based on their knowledge of the coordinate plane and based on their knowledge from geometry of 30, 60, 90 triangles and 45, 45, 90 triangles, they had to construct all of those and figure out what all the points would be along the circle. And so that would usually take a period or maybe, more longer than that. And then we'd come back at the end and really discuss what the connections were that they saw, what were the similarities, and what was it on those triangles, what was the horizontal piece and what was the vertical piece, the cosine and sine, and really have those conversations. So that now we are getting into the graph. And so this past week we've been, I had them do a spaghetti lab. And so they started back with that unit circle, and they had to take a piece of spaghetti to measure the radius of the circle. And then they actually constructed the circle with a string themselves. And then they measured those triangles. They took a piece of spaghetti and they measured what the vertical distance was, and then took that vertical distance and translated it to a graph so that they had all these different values so that they could see what the graph of sine looked like. And so they also had several questions that went along with that. One being, explain why sine of pi over 6 equals sine of 5 pi over 6. And so that went with, I wanted to point out, let's see, on page 113, Wiggins and McTeague talk about asking questions, specifically in math, stating what is the pattern and how do you know? And so they had to see what that pattern was. They also had to see, okay, what's going to happen after you get past 2 pi based on what you've noticed. And this makes, connects with the explanation part of what Wiggins and McTeague talk about on page 87. They say that we need to explain why our answer is correct, why the fact exists, why the formula works. We need to supply support for our opinions. When assessing, we look for good explanations from students, calling upon them to reveal their understanding by using such verbs as support, justify, generalize, predict, verify, prove, and substantiate. So they were having to make those connections about sine of pi over 6 and sine of 5 pi over 6, and they had to make those connections between the unit circle as well as the function graph. And I'll include some pictures of what they did in the comments. But then later on, they have to make those connections to the application part. when we get into simple harmonic motion. Simple harmonic motion being anything that's periodic in nature, like a pendulum, or a tuning fork, or a wheel, or tides coming in. All of those are periodic in nature. And so that goes to the application part, which Wiggins and McTeague talk about on page 92. Application is the ability to use knowledge effectively in new situations and diverse realistic contexts. And so they're having to make those connections from what they've learned to that real application that also connects in multiple subjects, specifically science and engineering. And so I hope I answered that question, but I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say in the comments, and hopefully you guys had a good spring break. Thank you. Bye.